What is mental health? Well, mental health is basically our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. What is a mental illness? Well, a mental illness is a condition that affects a person's thinking, feeling, or mood. Um, the way a mental illness affects a person can, it can hinder someone's ability to relate to other people, how they function, and even with the same mental illness, people are bound to have different reactions and different experiences. Individuals may have their mental health and conditions deteriorate over time, and teenagers are not only more susceptible to these ailments, but they're also facing a whole horde of stigmas and social queries as soon as they step into high school or middle school. And a lot of these changes may cause things such as depression and anxiety to occur, especially as statistics say 1 in 5 adolescents or teenagers, they experience a mental health disorder between the ages 13 through 18. Here are some interviews we have with people who will share their experiences regarding their own mental health, how they deal with deteriorating mental health and conditions, and what they've seen from other people.
How did you develop your mental disorders, and how do they affect you to this day?
Okay, so I developed my eating disorder in 3rd grade, along with body dysmorphia, because I was bullied a lot, and I kind of have been struggling with that aspect of accepting my body since then. And then depression, anxiety hit really hard when I was in 7th grade, because just the environment that I was placed in and familial problems that I was dealing with, I just kind of developed, and I have a predisposition for all of that. I developed PTSD from a break-in that happened when I was 10 years old.
How do they affect you? How does it last?
Okay, well, my depression and anxiety, I'm on medication for that. I take that every day. And it's really noticeable when I don't take it, because I will be an anxious mess, and that's just not good. And I have just daily panic attacks, which is why I'm on the medication. And to just kind of stabilize my mood. And then with the body dysmorphia and the eating disorder, I've kind of overcome all of that. It's still kind of something that I think about a lot, but it's not something that completely. That was just a bold-faced lie. There's all of that. And then there's PTSD, which I still I've been in therapy for 3 years for all of the PTSD, or I just recently told people, or told my therapist about it. So I was diagnosed last year, which is how it developed into PTSD, because I did not get help for it.
A few symptoms of deteriorating mental health could be eating or sleeping too much or too little, pulling away from people and usual activities, having low or no energy, feeling numb, emotionless, helplessness, hopelessness, feeling confused, forgetful, on edge, angry, yelling or fighting with close family members and friends, experiencing severe mood swings, having persistent thoughts, hearing voices, thinking of harming yourself or others, and the inability to perform daily tasks, like taking care of your kids or even getting to work or school.
So explain to me your current mental health.
Well, okay, I'm not diagnosed with anything. So this is all me being yo, I experienced this. And so while I can say that I am an anxious and depressed person, I can't have a medical backup on that because I just haven't gone to therapy and haven't gotten that like professional opinion. But I can say that like I have anxiety attacks and I experience like bouts of depression and like probably there's some PTSD thrown in there too.
Okay, so explain your experience and how you developed all of those.
My parents got divorced, and it was a couple months after my baby sister had been born. And as time went on, my parents' relationship worsened, and by the time I was 9, I hadn't seen my dad in about a year, and I wasn't talking to him. And then when I was 12 years old, and during summer, my father died due to thyroid complications, and I hadn't seen him in a number of years, hadn't had really any contact with him. And while all of this was happening, my stepmother, my mom's partner, was emotionally abusive. And so a lot of the insecurities that I have to this day can be rooted within that relationship. So all of those things combined sort of just made me an emotional wreck.
How do you let this affect your relationship with people around you?
Well, I've always been really empathetic and like always have put other people before myself, and I think that a lot of my mental health perpetuates that even more. Because like I'm always going to try to take care of the people around me, and then there's also like the negative side where like I can't trust people for a long period of time and stuff like that, but that's stuff that you work through and try to get over.
There are 4 major dimensions which support a life in recovery. 1, health, being informed and making healthy choices that support physical and emotional well-being. Number 2, home, having a stable and safe environment to live. Number 3, purpose, engaging in meaningful daily activities such as a job or school, volunteering, caring for your family, or being creative. Number 4, community, building relationships and social networks that provide support.
Okay, so how do you perceive mental health in like your students?
I mean, obviously that's just like a state of being, but there's a lot of struggles and issues, and the biggest ones that I notice among my students is going to be depression and anxiety. That's the biggest like mental afflictions that I pick up on. A lot of that comes from outside factors, or even a lot of like internal things like self-confidence, things like that. So various causes and various reasons for it, but I have all different levels, mostly of like depression and anxiety, or combination thereof.
So like, do you let that affect you, or do you?
So as a teacher and as anybody working in this field, and this is becoming even more popular, the idea of what's known as compassion fatigue, or like it's kind of like secondary trauma. So if you know somebody who's experienced trauma, and then they start sharing that information with you, you kind of go through that trauma in a way, right? So one of the issues that a lot of educators or people that work, like veterinarians, actually have a lot of. This is a big issue in the veterinarian field, is compassion fatigue, where you give a lot and you give a lot and you continue to see really hard things, sad things, tough situations, abuse or depression or anxiety, and it's crippling kids, right? And so your constant exposure to that can very easily turn to your own level of depression and anxiety. So that's definitely something that you have to be aware of, and it's definitely something that teachers should cope with, and I don't know if many of them even realize the level at which they're maybe being exposed to these things, how it is affecting them. And like, that's one of the big issues with mental health, is just admitting it, right? That's probably one of the biggest steps, is like just saying like, I have an issue I need to address. So yeah, it definitely can impact you, but that, personally me, that's one of the parts of the job that I kind of enjoy, is being able to give a safe space and being able to supply that outlet to these students, so I look at that as a necessary part of my job. So I try not to let that aspect of it affect me emotionally. But sometimes, yeah, it definitely can affect my state, and then depending on how I personally am feeling will affect my openness to take on others, right? So if I personally am struggling, it's going to be a lot more difficult for me to sit down with a student and say, all right, let's talk, let's share, let's see what's going on, I noticed it. So yeah, it can definitely impact my job for sure.
What do you notice usually, like for like students, that would help improve their like mental health and like their conditions?
So a lot of it, so like behaviors that I notice mostly is impact of work and like the way that they handle themselves and just kind of carry themselves in class. That's what I pick up on. It's subtle things. All right, maybe they'll mention something, but usually it's low energy. They're tired more, they're lacking work. They're maybe not talking with their friends that they normally talk with. Maybe kind of like I notice changes in their behavioral patterns that to me, I can kind of pinpoint and signal equals they're struggling with something. All right, test grades dropping, assignments not coming in. It's usually pretty obvious. Yeah, right. Well, it's usually pretty obvious when there's issues. The issues are developing. As far as like helping deal with it, the biggest issue that I have is trying to get not students but the parents to allow the students to find somebody to talk to, and to talk to somebody who's not necessarily gonna just medicate. So like my biggest concern is like culturally, like nationwide, it's very easy to say, oh, you're anxious, oh, you're depressed, take Xanax, take Zoloft, take this medication, and that doesn't really cure the issue. It just covers it and masks it and allows the kids to operate and function. And so there are a lot of side effects to those that I feel like there are non-medical ways of dealing with and coping mechanisms, or ways to breathing exercises, meditations, like ways to think and like ways to handle yourself that go beyond just medicating the problem. And so I think trying to see parents admit that their children are struggling, that's my biggest issue. And then getting them to get help for that, that's not just take them to the doctor and pump them with a pill real quick. There are times, obviously, like that's a necessary like thing, and they help traumatic, like big time. But you also have to piggyback that with curing, like helping eliminate the symptoms. Like besides just masking the problem, you also have to cope with the actual mental part and fix that, because that's all controllable with how you think. It's just not easy to do, and sometimes you need somebody who is outside of the family or doesn't know you quite as well to give you that proper advice, because they're viewing it from that outside, and that's a tough thing to get parents to kind of move forward on.
Okay, so can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Tracy Doring. I'm a mental health counselor and work with teenage girls.
Okay, so can you just like explain first like positive or first negative things that could deteriorate a person's mental health, and like positive things that could help it?
Yes, I mean there's a lot of things that'll go into somebody's mental health. I mean obviously biology, obviously genetics of somebody could determine whether or not they're going to have trouble mentally. There's also other aspects of things, their environment, experiences that they have had in their environment and with other people. If there's been any trauma, all of those things are going to affect how somebody's mental health plays out in the process of recovering or treating a mental health illness. It's helpful. Sometimes medication is something that has to be looked at in terms of getting somebody to a better place. Another determinant is going to be environment and social support, whether or not family and friends are involved, whether or not there's some kind of human connection and emotional support. Also, if there are things that somebody is able to work towards and has goals and things that they want to accomplish, that's also going to be something that's very helpful in terms of the process of recovering.